come on, man. Come on, man. Like, Napheesa, you gotta stop. Napheesa, you gotta stop. Y'all gotta stop lying. Y'all have got to stop lying. I cannot believe the blasphemy Napheesa Collier spewed at the podium just now for Unrivaled, talking about all of us players are united and we're all on the same page. No.
Interview 0sit25. Stop everything right now, because what just detonated in women's basketball feels less like a disagreement and more like an earthquake that cracked the league straight down the middle. This isn't a bad tweet. This isn't a misquote. This is a public narrative collapsing in real time after fans realized something didn't add up. And now, all eyes are locked on Napheesa Collier and Caitlin Clark in a moment nobody saw coming. For weeks, the story was clear, or so we were told. Players were unified. Everyone was in lockstep. The CBA talks were tough, but the message was simple. The players stood together. But then Caitlin Clark spoke. Calm, measured, strategic. She didn't threaten. She didn't posture. She said one thing that sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA ecosystem. Compromise matters and the season matters more. That's when the internet snapped. Clips were pulled. Quotes were replayed. Press conferences were slowed down frame by frame. And suddenly, fans started asking the question no one wanted asked out loud. Were we being told the truth, or were we being sold a story? Because when Napheesa Collier stood at that podium and declared full unity, people didn't just disagree. They accused her of misrepresenting Caitlin Clark's position entirely. Accusations of lying flooded social media. Influencers melted down. Timelines erupted. And behind the scenes, sources say panic set in fast. And now, in a twist nobody expected, whispers are spreading that an apology happened. Quiet, private, strategic. If that's true, it changes everything. Because if Napheesa Collier apologized to Caitlin Clark, then the lockstep narrative just shattered. And what comes next might blow the CBA talks wide open. The moment everything cracked didn't come with sirens or a breaking news banner. It came with a sentence that felt harmless on the surface but radioactive underneath. Napheesa Collier stood at that podium, calm, confident, polished, and said the words that would light the fuse. That WNBA players were unified, in lockstep, willing to do whatever it takes in the CBA negotiations. For a few seconds, it sounded reassuring. Then the internet remembered something else. Someone else. Caitlin Clark. Because just days earlier, Caitlin Clark had said something very different. Not angry, not confrontational. Strategic. She talked about compromise. She talked about protecting the season. She talked about fans, momentum, and the danger of blowing up the league's most explosive growth moment in its history. And when those two messages collided, the collision wasn't subtle. It was violent. Clips started circulating like wildfire. One side-by-side edit alone racked up millions of views in hours. On one side, Napheesa Collier talking about doing whatever it takes. On the other, Caitlin Clark saying there has to be give and take, and that losing games would hurt everyone. Comment sections turned into war zones. Influencers who had never criticized players before were suddenly furious, accusing leadership voices of speaking for players who clearly weren't on the same page. And that's when the word everyone feared started trending. Lying. Not as a legal accusation, not as a proven fact, but as a perception, as an emotional verdict from fans who felt misled. Stop lying flooded timelines. Caitlin never said that. This is not lockstep. The tone wasn't disappointment anymore. It was betrayal. Behind the scenes, sources say the reaction was immediate. Group chats blew up. Player reps scrambled. Media teams realized they had a narrative crisis on their hands. Because the issue wasn't just disagreement. Disagreement is normal in labor talks. The issue was that Napheesa's statement was being interpreted as speaking for Caitlin Clark when Caitlin had very publicly carved out her own position. And Caitlin Clark is not just another player. She is the player who drove ratings up 170%. The player who turned random Tuesday night games into must-watch television. The player sponsors built campaigns around. The player casual fans followed into the WNBA. So when fans felt like her voice was being overwritten, the backlash was instant and ferocious. The chaos didn't stay online. According According to multiple insiders, Napheesa Collier was blindsided by how fast the narrative turned. What she believed was a standard leadership message suddenly looked like a misrepresentation. Not because she intended to mislead, but because the room she spoke from didn't include every voice she claimed alignment with. That distinction matters. And once the perception of overreach takes hold, intent becomes irrelevant. Cameras weren't there when the first calls happened, but people close to the situation say they were tense. Short sentences, long pauses, the kind of conversations where everyone realizes the situation is spiraling faster than anyone can control. One source described it as the moment the unity myth died. Then came the reactions from other players. Some stayed silent, which only added fuel. Others posted vague messages about not being afraid to speak your truth. A few liked Caitlin Clark, related posts that fans interpreted as quiet support. Every interaction was screenshot. Every like was treated like a declaration of allegiance. The league had entered full-blown civil war mode without a single official statement changing. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark did exactly what made the situation more explosive. She didn't respond. No tweet, no clarification, no walk back, just silence. That silence was read in 100 different ways. Supporters said she was being classy and focused. Critics said she was letting the internet fight her battle. But to many, it looked like quiet confidence, like someone who knew her words were already on record and didn't need defending. And that's when things reportedly shifted behind closed doors. Multiple sources claim there was a private outreach, not public, not performative, one-on-one. The kind of conversation that never shows up on timelines but decides everything. No transcript, no recording, just a conversation where reality finally catches up with rhetoric. The word spreading now is apology. Not a dramatic one, not a tearful press conference, but an acknowledgement. A recognition that Caitlin Clark's stance had been flattened into a broader narrative she didn't agree with. An understanding that saying, "We're all aligned," hits differently when one of the league's most visible players has clearly said otherwise. And if that apology happened, even quietly, it changes the power dynamics instantly. Because it means the lockstep narrative wasn't just challenged by fans, it was challenged internally. The fan base felt it immediately. The tone online shifted from pure rage to vindication. So we weren't crazy. They knew. That's why Caitlin didn't respond. Videos started framing the situation not as a feud, but as a moment of forced accountability. Napheesa Collier, once seen as an unquestioned leader voice, was now being scrutinized in a way she'd never experienced before. But the most dangerous part of all this wasn't the apology rumor. It was what it implied. If leadership voices were willing to soften, clarify, or apologize behind the scenes, it suggested something far bigger. The players were never as unified as the public was told. And if that's true, then everything about the CBA negotiations suddenly looks different. Whose interests are being prioritized? Who benefits from a hardline stance? And who pays the price if games don't get played? Because while stars can survive a lockout, fringe players can't. International players can't. Rookies fighting for roster spots can't. And Caitlin Clark, whether she wanted the role or not, had just become the symbolic voice of that uncomfortable reality. By the end of that first explosive stretch, one thing was clear. This wasn't about Napheesa versus Caitlin as people. It was about truth versus narrative. And the narrative had taken a hit it might not recover from. And just when people thought the damage had already been done, new details started surfacing that suggested this conversation wasn't a one-off misunderstanding, but the beginning of something much messier that nobody was prepared to contain. The rumor of that quiet apology didn't calm anything down. It poured gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. Because once fans believed that a behind-the-scenes acknowledgement happened, the conversation shifted from "did she lie?" to something far more dangerous. What else aren't we being told? The internet immediately split into camps. One side argued that Napheesa Collier did the right thing by addressing it privately, saying leadership means knowing when to course correct without turning everything into a spectacle. The other side wasn't buying it at all. They said a private apology confirmed what they'd been screaming all along, that the public narrative was misleading, and the correction only came once it blew up in her face. That's when the leaks started. Nothing official, nothing confirmed, just screenshots floating around from group chats allegedly tied to players, agents, and insiders, all saying variations of the same thing. This is getting bad. We need to get on the same page. Caitlyn's comments changed everything. Whether real or not, those messages felt real enough to fans who already sensed fractures beneath the surface. What made this moment explode even harder was how different the reactions were depending on where players sat in the league hierarchy. Veteran stars defended Napheesa publicly or with carefully worded posts about solidarity. Younger players stayed quiet, but their silence felt heavy. International players liked posts about protecting seasons and jobs. Fringe players spoke anonymously to podcasts and blogs, saying they were terrified of a lockout and felt completely unheard. And through all of it, Caitlin Clark still said nothing. That silence became the loudest voice in the room. Media outlets started framing the situation differently, not as drama, but as a philosophical split. On one side, players who had already made their money and wanted structural change at any cost. On the other, players who understood momentum, optics, and the brutal reality that you can't negotiate revenue if you stop generating it. Caitlin Clark became the face of that second group, whether she asked for it or not. And that's when Napheesa Collier's frustration reportedly turned into something sharper. According to sources close to the situation, she felt unfairly painted as a villain when she believed she was speaking aspirationally, not deceptively. She allegedly told people close to her that unity doesn't mean unanimity, and that leadership sometimes requires projecting strength even when there are disagreements. But the problem was simple. That's not how fans heard it. And once fans feel gaslit, they don't forget. Then came the meltdown moment. A live stream clip circulated showing a prominent WNBA content creator absolutely losing it, repeating, "Stop lying," over and over, accusing leadership players of sacrificing younger athletes for leverage while hiding behind unity buzzwords. That clip alone pulled in hundreds of thousands of views in hours. Comment sections exploded with personal stories from players, fans, and even parents of athletes terrified their daughters' careers could be stalled before they even started. The emotional temperature skyrocketed. Former players weighed in. Analysts jumped on debate panels. Some defended Napheesa's intent. Others said intent doesn't matter when words have consequences. A former executive even hinted that ownership was watching this unfold closely, taking notes on how fractured the Players' Association actually appeared in public. And here, where the betrayal narrative really locked in. People started revisiting the original press conference with fresh eyes. The phrasing, the pauses, the way Napheesa said, "what we think we deserve" instead of "what we deserve." Fans slowed the footage down, dissecting every word like it was testimony. Was she hedging? Was she covering herself? Or was she unconsciously acknowledging the very divide she claimed didn't exist? At the same time, Caitlin Clark's original comments began circulating again, not in outrage clips, but in almost reverent edits. Calm music, clean subtitles, emphasis on the season matters and fans matter. Those videos went viral in a completely different way. Not angry, convicted. Fans started calling her the most important voice in the league, not because she was loud, but because she was grounded. That terrified people. Because once a league's most valuable draw is positioned as the voice of reason against its own leadership narrative, everything gets unstable fast. Sponsors pay attention. Broadcasters pay attention. Owners definitely pay attention. The last thing anyone negotiating a billion-dollar future wants is the perception that the players can't even agree with each other. According to insiders, that's when pressure ramped up internally to cool things down. Fewer public statements, more behind-the-scenes calls, emphasis on "we're still talking." But the damage was already baked in. The fans didn't forget. The clips didn't disappear. The contradiction was documented forever. And that quiet apology rumor, it kept growing legs. More people claimed to have heard about it. More insiders hinted that it was less an apology and more a clarification. But even that distinction didn't help. Because clarification means the original statement was unclear at best, misleading at worst. Napheesa Collier's image shifted in real time. Not destroyed, not canceled, but cracked, from unquestioned leader to contested voice. And once that happens, every future statement gets filtered through skepticism. Every press conference answer gets parsed. Every leadership claim gets cross-checked against who's actually speaking publicly. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's brand only got stronger. Without saying a word, she became the symbol of compromise, momentum, and pragmatism. Fans credited her with protecting the league's future even while negotiations dragged on. That kind of cultural power doesn't come from press conferences. It comes from trust. And right now, trust was the most valuable currency in the WNBA. By the time the dust from that second wave started settling, one thing was undeniable. This was no longer about one comment at a podium. It was about credibility, about who gets to speak for whom, and about whether the league could survive a labor fight when its most visible voices were clearly not aligned. And just when it seemed like things might stabilize, a new layer emerged, one that threatened to blow past messaging and straight into consequences that couldn't be walked back. Because if the players weren't unified, and everyone now knew it, the next move in these negotiations could fracture the league in ways no apology, public or private, could fix. By the time the third wave hit, this wasn't chaos anymore. It was consequence. The conversation had moved past who said what and into something far more dangerous. What happens next when the illusion of unity is gone and everyone can see the cracks? Insiders say the mood around the negotiations shifted almost overnight. Rooms that were once filled with confident talking points suddenly felt tense, careful, restrained. People weren't just choosing words anymore, they were choosing sides. And once that happens, there's no such thing as a neutral sentence. Every comment is read as strategy. Every pause feels intentional. Every smile looks rehearsed. The rumor of that private apology continued to hover like a storm cloud. No confirmation, no denial, just enough smoke to keep everyone staring at the horizon. Some sources insisted it was a sincere moment of acknowledgement, a recognition that Caitlin Clark's position had been flattened into a soundbite she never signed off on. Others claimed it was more of a let's reset conversation, the kind designed to stop the bleeding before it reached sponsors and broadcasters. Either way, the takeaway was the same. The narrative had overreached, and it had to be corrected. That realization landed hard. Because once a leadership voice adjusts behind the scenes, the power balance changes in front of the cameras. Players who felt unheard suddenly felt validated. Fringe voices grew louder. Anonymous quotes started popping up in articles, all saying versions of the same thing. We want to play. We're scared of losing momentum. We don't all agree. Those words were never supposed to be public, and yet there they were, stacked together like evidence. Caitlin Clark remained silent through it all, and that silence became the sharpest contrast in the entire saga. No clapbacks, no subtweets, no clarifications. She didn't need them. Her original comments kept circulating, and with every replay, they sounded less like opinion and more like foresight. Fans began calling it the moment she grew into something bigger than a rookie star, the moment she became a gravitational force in the league's future. That shift didn't go unnoticed. According to multiple reports, ownership circles started referencing her comments in private discussions, not as opposition, but as reality checks. Broadcasters echoed similar concerns off the record. The message was simple and terrifying. A season without games is a season without leverage. Momentum is fragile, and you only get one chance to ride a cultural wave before it breaks. Napheesa Collier, for her part, reportedly felt the weight of that realization settling in. Sources describe a mix of frustration and resolve, frustration at being painted as deceptive, resolve to reclaim clarity. People close to her say she never intended to speak over anyone, but intentions don't rewrite outcomes. Once fans believe a statement erased dissent, the damage is already done. And then came the moment that sealed it. A panel appearance, not dramatic, not explosive, just a subtle shift in language. Words like alignment replaced lockstep. Phrases like many of us replaced all of us. To the casual viewer, it meant nothing. To everyone watching closely, it meant everything. It was the quietest confirmation yet that the original framing had gone too far. The internet caught it instantly. Clips spread with captions like "Notice the change" and "Language matters." The comment sections weren't angry this time, they were vindicated. "So we were right. That's all we wanted. Just tell the truth." The temperature dropped, but the trust didn't automatically return. Once broken, credibility doesn't snap back into place. It has to be rebuilt brick by brick, statement by statement. Behind the scenes, the stakes grew heavier. Negotiators now had to account for public fractures they could no longer deny. Every hardline position risked being seen as selfish. Every compromise risked being framed as weakness. And hovering over all of it was the unspoken fear that if this went sideways, if games were lost, if fans walked away, the blame wouldn't be abstract. It would land on specific names, specific quotes, specific moments that people would never forget. Caitlin Clark's influence only grew. Not because she demanded it, not because she campaigned for it, but because her words aligned with what the audience felt in their bones. Don't kill what you're building. That alignment is rare. And when it happens, it changes who holds real power. Not official power, cultural power. The kind that decides where attention goes and where it disappears. By this point, even supporters of Napheesa Collier began reframing their defense. Less "she was right" and more "she was trying." Less absolutes, more nuance. That shift mattered. It signaled that the fan base was ready to move forward, but not without acknowledgement of what went wrong. And that's where the story truly landed. Not on a podium, not in a tweet, but in the understanding that words spoken in moments of confidence can become liabilities when reality pushes back. The apology rumor, whether fully accurate or not, became symbolic of that lesson. A recognition that leadership isn't just about projecting unity, it's about respecting difference without erasing it. The CBA talks didn't end. The tension didn't vanish, but something fundamental changed. The myth of total alignment was gone, replaced by a messier, more honest picture of a league at a crossroads. Stars and rookies, veterans and internationals, owners and players, all pulling on the same rope but not always in the same direction. And that honesty, uncomfortable as it was, might be the only thing that saves what comes next. Because if this moment proved anything, it's that fans are no longer satisfied with slogans. They want transparency, they want truth, and they're paying closer attention than ever. The apology wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the story finally told itself. Before you even think about clicking away, understand this. Moments like this don't get rewritten later. This is one of those turning points people pretend they saw coming after the dust settles, but right now, you're watching it unfold in real time. The narrative cracked, the power shifted, and what happens next in this league will be shaped by who paid attention and who didn't. If this story made you pause, if you felt that tension because something about it finally made sense, that's not an accident. That's what happens when carefully packaged messaging collides with reality. And once that collision happens, there's no going back to business as usual. The next statement, the next deal, the next season, all of it is hanging in the balance. So don't disengage now. Hit like immediately to tell the algorithm this conversation matters and won't be buried. Drop a comment with your take, because those reactions aren't just noise. They're proof that fans are watching, listening, and holding people accountable. And subscribe right now, because the next update won't come with a warning. It won't be softened. It won't be filtered through PR spin. It will hit fast, and you'll want to be here when it does. Missing what comes next means watching everyone else react while you're trying to piece together what happened after the fact. And trust me, when the next move is made in these negotiations, there will be no neutral ground left. Stay locked in. Stay informed. Because this story isn't over, it's only entering its most important chapter.